Well, lots of different views, of course, about our electricity crisis. You heard Mamelda Isabey just a moment ago. Francesca de Gasparis is the director of the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute. Francesca, good afternoon to you. You want affordable energy for people. What do you believe we should do about the mess that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the load shedding crisis that we're experiencing and then an over 18% increase for Eskom, it's entirely unacceptable. I mean, there's a number of things that need to change. First of all, we need to have a complete shift in how we're doing energy planning. I think that's absolutely critical.
You mean that we need to just start to think completely differently from where we are now?
Yeah, I do. And I think what we're seeing right now is an Eskom that is got costs. I was last year on a kind of online debate with an Eskom employee, and she was explaining to all of us how they arrive at the figures that they arrive at. And for Eskom, this isn't even full cost recovery. So they're still running at a loss, but it's completely unaffordable for people who are trying to buy electricity in South Africa. So they need a wholesale rethink on how they're calculating these tariff hikes. And there should be penalties for SOEs who don't deliver. I mean, why on earth are we having to pay more money for something which we're not even able to access with any reliability?
Do you believe government and Eskom are actually able to fix the situation?
I think that there needs to be greater political will, and I do think government can fix it. I mean, look what they did during COVID. You can release billions if needs be, but you need to understand the crisis. And maybe more of our politicians need to be sitting in homes that receive load shedding.
So, I mean, there are lots of different ways. You say we need to plan differently. Would you change the network? Would you bring in different forms of power generation? Would you try and reduce or would you increase our reliance on coal?
From our side, and as an environmental NGO that looks at the costs of electricity, the cost to the consumers, the cost to the environment, and the looming crisis of climate change, we absolutely don't believe that coal would be the way forward. I think that with the proper energy plan, we would be able to see where are the least cost and most effective ways to move. And as we've seen globally, it's not really a debate. It's renewable energy. Other countries have done it where they've cut red tape, they've made it affordable for households, for small businesses, for the like to get onto the grid with renewable energy, and we could rapidly address the issue that we have. We also, as SAFC, as you know, we've been following the nuclear energy issue for a long time. We've got an extra stage of load shedding at the moment because they've taken one of the Koeberg nuclear power units offline. Why? Because there's an insistence on extending the life of the Koeberg nuclear power plant. We don't need that. We actually need better energy planning now. We need to keep those units online during this crisis and make sure that we build to have energy that is affordable, reliable, and accessible. In 2 years' time, that could be done.
You reckon it could be done in 2 years? I mean, we've seen the Energy Minister, Gwede Mantashe, saying load shedding could be over in 6 to 12 months. I don't know if you believe him.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. I think that Mr. Mantashe seems to be very interested in gas, coal, nuclear, all things which are not part of a just transition in terms of our energy future. We need to have both a short-term and a long-term view. Our political leaders can do that, but they're just bringing an ideological bias at the moment, which means that we keep on finding ourselves in a gridlock mess. You can see it on Twitter, how toxic the debates around these issues are. There's a real push, and we know from previously in the last nuclear energy battle, it becomes an ideological battle rather than actually looking at facts and figures and reality.
There's a huge amount of anger and frustration at this situation. You talk about watching the debate on Twitter. You can hear it and see it everywhere. People, I think, are angrier than they've perhaps been for many, many years. Are you worried, Francesca, this could all be about to boil over in some way?
Well, look, I think the problem with issues like this is when it gets really polarized, politicians almost can't resist using it for their own gain. And that's what really worries me. We've seen that time and time again, and we don't need that right now. We really need some level-headed thinking. We need a de-escalation of that kind of polarization. And we need people to really, for a serious reflection on how people must be suffering when they cannot afford electricity. It's not allowing people to do basic functions, and it's the government's responsibility to give us access to basic services. If you can't afford electricity, you should be able to easily access a basic electricity grant. It's part of how government is meant to be working. So I think it's a fundamental failure. And government needs to take it extremely seriously and really start pulling finger.
Francesca de Gasparis, thank you, Director of the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute. Really appreciate the time. Well,